Ladies and gentlemen, to tackle some of the biggest questions on why the evolution of patient monitoring is so important in healthcare, I'd like to welcome to the stage Peter Ziese, Philips Business Leader Monitoring and Analytics, Franklin Schuling, Innovation Program Manager Connected Care at Philips Research, Jaap Trappenburg, Board Member of the Healthcare Innovation Center at UMC Utrecht, Dan Gelvan, Chairman of the Board for Biobeat, and Benno, Tieke, Head of Portfolio Management at Philips HealthWorks, to moderate the discussions.
So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, wonderful panel. Thanks for being here. The future of patient monitoring. What a panel. So maybe let's jump straight into it, Peter. We heard you briefly in the video. Can you say a few words on why patient monitoring is so important, and what changes do you see coming up in the near future?
Well, you need to think about patient monitoring traditionally as a safety net. It was developed for patients who could not articulate, am I doing still well, or do I feel pain, do I have an issue, critical care. But if we look at that safety net, honestly, we need to just span it broader. For patients having issues, not just in critical care, they have it in general ward, they have it in skilled nursing facilities, they have it at home. Patient monitoring is the business of patient safety. It's about avoiding or at least reducing complications, and that's what makes everybody in our team so passionate, for we impact positively patients' lives.
Thanks, Peter, for this nice opening statement. Maybe, Jaap, can I involve you in the discussion? You are at UMC Utrecht, part of an organization that looks at the provider needs, at the hospital needs in this. Can you share the clinical perspective on patient monitoring?
Yes. First of all, this is like the video already showed, is that patient monitoring is a very wide innovation domain, and from a clinical perspective, it can boot up as a different or a wide range of working mechanisms towards creating value for hospitals. And I think one of the most important one is still that it really enriches, not really replacing, but enriching clinical decision-making of clinicians, but also allowing a better and earlier detection of serious events or acute deterioration of patients, also allowing for faster and earlier discharge or transfer to lower intensive care units. And I think that the sky is the limit regarding the technological possibilities to do so.
Great. So maybe then you are an investor and involved in a startup. So my simple question to you is, why patient monitoring? Because you have a number of startups that you're involved with, and this one that you talk about later, you're really putting your heart and soul into that.
I am, yes. So I think I see it very much like Jaap. When I think about patient monitoring, it's about every medical decision is based on information. So the medical monitoring is supposed to provide information to the clinicians to make skilled decisions. And not always do we give them much more. We have to give them relevant information, and they'll make the right decisions. And I think I'll take an example of what has happened in self-glucose monitoring, because it's a field Philips is not in, I think, as far as I know. So it started in the 1980s with some very crude devices where you would have to prick your finger. It was painful like hell, and it took a lot of blood. And it evolved into become a smaller blood drop, and then it became continuous monitoring. And now we are suddenly seeing closed-loop solutions where the insulin is administered directly from the monitor. And suddenly we've gotten rid of unaware nocturnal hypoglycemia. So without any changes in the drugs available, we've actually continued with the same kind of insulins throughout the past 30 years. The only thing that has changed is what kind of information do we have available, and we've just eliminated a huge problem where people could actually die. So I do see patient monitoring as generating raw material for better medical and more informed decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, and say it's something tangible where we need to go in all kinds of monitoring solutions.
And we'll go there with hypertension as well, and start to get people's blood pressure under control, which is not true.
We don't do your pitch now, so
No,
we will hear it later.
I'm just thinking about your blood pressure.
Every moment you can pitch, it's fine. But so I think we all agree on the vision, say in this panel. But there are obstacles, and maybe you as a startup you have some experience with those obstacles, because you must have thought, well, already 2 years ago we are there, and now we're implementing, and it takes some time. So what are the obstacles from your perspective?
It is tremendously difficult to get into the hospital market. So the way I see the hospitals is they used to have some very, very bad workflows, completely analog. They were appropriate and developed 30 years ago. And then we came as industry and we start to push technology. So when you walk into a hospital, there's a lot of technology. And we have digitized all these old workflows, and now we have digitized analog workflows. And what we don't have, and this is the problem for us as startups, is that we don't have digital workflows in the hospital. They don't think in terms of what can you do with all this digitization. So we have a hard time. We come with these fancy solutions, and they are still stuck in, yes, sir, here's your MRI result. Can you just wait a second? We want to burn you a CD that you can take back to the ward so they can see the result as well. And this is a very, very, very difficult for us, because we are probably 10 years ahead of the way they think about how to do things.
Yeah, and then maybe we have a whole discussion how to integrate it into larger systems, and maybe involving Franklin here. So you have your share of obstacles as well, because you're responsible for the research innovation portfolio for all of our businesses, and there's always great propositions. We see them in our labs all the time, and then obstacles in implementation. Can you say a few words?
Maybe rather than talking about obstacles, I always like to talk about challenges. What do we aspire? So indeed, I think our patient monitoring efforts, I think we can be very proud of what we have achieved over the past decades. Because as Philips, as a company, we have achieved market share leadership. We have equipped more than half of the hospitals globally with our monitors. And look in the corridor. Look, when you walked up to the stage here, what did you see? You saw 50 years of excellence in building nice monitoring devices, creating measurements, setting standards of what is the accuracy level of how you want to measure physiology, because that's in the end what we do. We measure physiology, conditions that represent our body status. I see a lot of startups here bringing devices to connected devices, to smarter devices, bringing intelligence to the devices. That's beautiful. That's one obstacle that we have to take. Make them seamlessly connected into the system. The other obstacle is that our customers say, we don't want separate boxes anymore. We want integrated solutions. We want you to transform how we deliver care in that intensive care setting. We want you, Philips, to help us bring the data together, and not the data, but bring us the visualization of it, but bring us also instant decision making on the spot, so that we can not react to an alarm and become tired of the alarms, but can start to predict when the alarm would happen, or better, predict when the physiology deteriorates. I think that's the biggest obstacle, to make that transformation from devices to seamless connectivity, to seamless decision support. That, I think, is our challenge.
Maybe, Peter, you want to add something?
Well, in the end, if a monitor sounds an alarm, let's do a check with the audience. Who thinks it's good that there is a monitor in case the heart rate is up or the blood pressure is down, sounds an alarm? Can you give me a sign of hand? Who thinks that's something good? Well, it's a loaded question. You should say, well, it depends. For A, it's good that it's not getting worse. But seriously, it's already bad because a critical physiological situation has been reached. We are reacting on an alarm. Heaven's sake, reaction per default is late. What if the monitor would never sound an alarm because physiological parameters are kept in range. Then patients are safe. Then you don't see the complications coming. Then we're doing something prescriptive, as you saw in the video. Then we actually help optimize therapy and provide patient safety in action. That's what we're passionate about, and that's what we need to do. There needs to be a safety net, but ideally we never ever want our patients or ourselves as human beings needing that safety net to fall into.
Well, that could be a great statement at the end of the panel, but we're not there yet. So no, this is really good. So maybe to put it into a broader perspective, we talk a lot about the quadruple aim, and well, in UMC Utrecht, you're also looking at the better outcomes, better patient experience, better staff experience, and obviously better financial results. So, which elements of what we see here in innovations in patient monitoring will contribute to the quadruple aim from your perspective?
I think many of these causal pathways which are created through patient monitoring can create value within the quadruple aim. I think that advancements in patient monitoring are really exciting, but not always successful, because there's also, in many cases, a mismatch with the specific needs on the work floor. And I think that still a substantial amount of the innovations have been developed from a technology push perspective, and sometimes at the end of the innovation process are not successful in creating value or successfully implementation. But to going into your question. Sensors are becoming increasingly small, accurate, and wearable, which is very interesting, and we are better and better equipped also to make sense of data and helping clinicians to really support their decision making through also analyzing and helping them to detect and even predicting increases of disease activity or even acute events. That's I think one of the most important things. And other things within the quadruple aim is that it also enhances some basic efficiency in the hospital. I think we all know the rather traditional ways of taking temperature in a patient, which is relatively analog and manual until now. And I think we all agree that taking up temperature during multiple shifts in multiple patients will be replaced through real-time monitoring of the patient and supports nurses to win time and doing other things, but also providing them with a better longitudinal overview of the patient.
So, and I think with one of the startups we are discussing, in fact, some health economics study with Utrecht after the discussion we had when we visited. That really the impact on workflow, on efficiency, is then really mapped out in a real economics study. But then it's interesting that you mentioned the different pathways that monitoring feeds into, and that you can manage. So we had what Darren was showing, one of the challenges, the 360 degrees patient view on the pathways. I must say we didn't find many startups who were addressing this, say, really end to end. We would have loved to find one. So maybe we have some work cut out ourselves to develop this, because it's much more of a system question probably than a single disease part. But that's very interesting. So, hearing your perspective, I turn back to us as Philips, Franklin, and Peter. So we have been, as you said, a leader in patient monitoring for decades. And then the question is, what does it take for the next decade, for the next 2 decades, to stay ahead? What capabilities, competences do we need? What type of behavior do we need to stay ahead?
maybe I'll start and you can take it over, Peter. What I clearly see, indeed, your observation is right. Many of the startups that are here gathered today, they focus not so much on the integration or the end-to-end play or how does it fit into the workflow. Actually, we visited a few stands and all the questions were about how does it connect the data into the backend. So I think the key capability that we as a company will need to develop is how do we orchestrate, how do we help those that are responsible for delivering the care to help reduce the waste, help reduce the error. How do we orchestrate that ecosystem? How do we make sure that we combine the data that are captured across the entire continuum from the ambulance to the home? And how do we make sense out of it so that the intensivist or the nurse or the CIO or the chief medical officer can make decisions on the spot to make sure, hey, I see this trend, I see maybe if I don't do anything now, in 4 hours, there may be a septic shock appearing. How do we integrate the data and how do we enable the decision making? I keep coming back to decision making. It's all about decision making to not react, but to be ahead of the game. And I think the biggest capability shift that we need to make as a company is how do we build our backend, how do we build our platforms to enable that data orchestration? How do we pull the federated data from all the systems in a hospital enterprise together to help make that decision on the spot, on time, actually ahead of the time? And that is the major capability shift that we need to make as a company. And then I think partnering with all those ecosystem players will get us the richness of the new measurements of new wearables, new devices.
So in fact, this point came back in I think the 10, 12 hospital visits we had with the startups that each time they liked at least 3, 4, 5 of the startups that we brought to the hospitals, but every time we ended with a discussion, how do you integrate that, Philips? I don't want to rip out my monitoring system. I don't want to put in another box. How do you integrate? So that's a key question. Maybe Peter, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think first and foremost, to take up what Jaap said as a customer, that was a very important statement. It's not about technology. It's not per se. It's not about the innovation per se. It's about the impact we're having, the value creating for our customers, really addressing their challenges, whether they're around patient safety, whether they are in the area of improving the workflow that is quite often cumbersome, fragmented, and indeed not up to date if we compare it to our own real-world experience outside the healthcare systems. So what we need as a capability, first and foremost, is to stay focused and tuned to the needs of our customers. I think this is the most important piece of DNA we need to have to be truly customer-centric. And if we talk about solutions, and solutions so often are a buzzword, for me a solution exists only if there is a defined problem and a unique value-adding way to solve for it. Then we have a valuable solution. We are a solution provider. We provide value to our customers, and that's the DNA, that's the mindset we have had in 50 years of innovation, we will have going forward, and that's what sets us apart, based and combined with all the technology innovation we are talking a lot about here, but for me it's about focusing on the challenges of our customers first.
Yeah, that's great. So before we conclude, we haven't addressed one aspect because we have been talking hospital all the time. So, and Jaap, in the pre-discussion we also in fact touched upon one of the challenge areas, monitoring beyond the hospital, so outside the hospital walls. And in fact you are also very passionate as a hospital about this part, and maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, like telehealth as an early discharge solution or a remote chronic disease management support has evolved greatly over the last few years. But there's still a lot of a need for evidence to identify actually which patients actually benefit from technology surveilling them, are technologies supporting them in self-managing their disease. And that's an interesting balance between these two types of working mechanisms. Because increasing self-management skills and supporting patients in managing their disease themselves through technology is extremely difficult. And for some of the conditions, still no vital signs or biomarkers have been discovered. On the other end, there's also a very interesting new innovation field within monitoring, and that's digital biomarkers. And I think digital biomarkers, these very interesting, relevant combinations of data collected by sometimes consumer-based sensors in combination with data connected in your pocket, really provides new potential to disrupt the system, but disrupt the hard threshold between care and prevention as well. But of course also creates new challenges within the care pathway.
That's very good. I don't know, Dan, because you are one of the startups addressing a little bit this boundary between the hospital and the home. So a few comments from your side.
Yes, absolutely. We all see the hardships in that it's very hard for hospitals to envision that they have to take care of a patient who's not at the physical compound of the hospital. But we see a lot of interest in self-management, but also we see new providers coming up that will actually help you manage your disease, and these will be separate from the hospital. So we're seeing the electronic companies coming in, the Googles and the Amazons are coming for our lunches. And they're getting in there. They want to be providers. They want to do some of this work that the hospitals can't get their arms around. So this is an interesting thought, and this is actually what we're seeing coming right now, because many of these sensors, you will see new providers. You will see digital health providers that are not hospitals, and the hospitals will be left with their current business because no one's going to buy a $350,000 MRI machine for their backyard. But a lot of the lower hanging fruit will be provided by tech companies and not by the conventional players.
Yeah. So maybe to conclude, so here we look to the future, and let's also say the future is now. The tech companies coming in, a lot of developments are happening. So maybe Peter, Franklin, what are you most excited about for the next 3 years to come in the field? So really as of now, or maybe Jaap as well. So
well, I'm excited by many things that I see ahead of us for patient monitoring. I would say if we can move patient monitoring from a monitoring business to a patient management business, so to really help the nurses, the staff, the doctors to prevent error, to really help manage the condition across, that would be fantastic. To be honest, that will take more than 3 or 5 years. So I would say if in the next 3 years we can transition to really quantify the quadruple aim as we claim it, that would already be a big step ahead of.
Very uncoordinated, but absolutely in sync. It's about, in the end, providing in a measurable way better outcomes. If we look at the quadruple aim in its essence, the lower costs will come as a consequence of avoiding the cost of non-quality. So having better outcomes is really what's at the core, and that automatically gives you a better staff and a better patient experience all combined. So what really excites me is to be able to prove in a repeatable manner that our solutions impact patient safety and avoid and reduce complications, and therefore have better outcomes in the world out there.
Thanks. So with this, I can't say it better, Peter. So let's conclude the panel. Let's give, say, also some space to the startups in a moment. So thanks a lot for being here on stage.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.